Hey everybody, and welcome back to 6++. My name is Lee, and today we're going to be going through our second video for the Thousand Suns Faction 101 series. So firstly, I must apologise for how long it's taken to get this video out. Life has been very busy, but we'll hopefully get back on track now. So this video is going to cover off a lot of the fundamentals for how to play the Thousand Suns, and really how to make sure you're getting the most out of your Cabal. So with that in mind, today's topics are going to include the Thousand Suns army-wide faction rules, very important. The Kabal point system, maybe even more important again. Army composition, playstyle, how you might want to sort of structure your force. And then primary play, obviously very important in the current mission rules, and secondary mission selection. Alright then, so let's just get started straight away with those army-wide rules. The first one to mention is that your objective secured ability. This is an important ability in the army, and most armies will have a rule that functions in a similar way. But because of the way that the primary mission scoring works, units from your army with this ability will hold an objective even if your opponent has models on the objective, just as long as they don't also have the objective secured ability. Now this is just really good for flipping an objective. You can get some of your units onto an objective that your opponent only has, let's say, a vehicle on. Then you have the opportunity then to sort of steal that primary objective from them. So in a Thousand Suns army, your objective secured units are your Bray units. That means it's your Zangors, and also it's your Rubric Marines. And in a really notable shift from the 8th edition book, now also your Scarabocop Terminators. And this is really fantastic, as these guys are one of the standout units in the entire book, and this represents a huge buff to them and really turns into a unit that can do it all. It can shoot, it can fight, it can psychic, and now it can hold objectives as well. The next special rule that we're going to talk about, the army-wide special rule, is the Brotherhood of Sorcerers Detachment ability. Again, this has changed since 8th edition. In my opinion, it's a huge improvement. So now, Psychers in your army, including all of your Rubric Marines and Terminators, will all gain a flat +1 to their cast whenever they're trying to attempt to manifest a psychic power. This is obviously huge for an army that relies so heavily on casting psychic powers. And actually a lot of them are fairly difficult to cast in terms of their Warp Judge anyway. So much of your utility and your damage will come from the psychic phase that having a flat +1 is really, really good. Previously it was a +6 inches to range, which was also quite nice. However, what you'll see is that a lot of the ranges have been adjusted in this book anyway, so you're actually not losing out as much as it might feel. Okay, so the next faction-wide rule I want to talk about is how your Zangor units and your Arcana Astartes units gain a 5+ invulnerable save. You may be asking yourself, what is Arcana Astartes? But it's actually a very common keyword in the book, so you can expect to get a lot of value out of this rule. As a result, maybe you'll see some units that don't get much play in other factions become a lot more valuable for Thousand Suns. So whilst being your sort of Rubric Marines and Terminators, things such as a Hellbrute will also now gain a 5+ invulnerable save. A Rhino will get a 5+ invulnerable save, and that actually means that 80 points is actually maybe worth another look. Okay, so as well as all these great buffs, there are some constraints here as well. One of the things we're seeing a lot in the books now is restriction on certain HQs, and the same is here. So now the Thousand Suns have the Jealous Tyrants rule, which means you'll only be allowed to have one Demon Prince per design. Oh, I actually need to read that because I don't know if that's true. It would have been true as well. All right, coming back. Alright then, so as well as these great army-wide buffs, there are some constraints here as well. For instance, now you can only take one Demon Prince per detachment as a result of the Jealous Tyrants rule, and that's something we're seeing pop up in more and more books, just limiting your HQ choices a little bit more to avoid spamming them. And similarly to other books, you're also limited to one Bray, i.e. Zangor or Cultist, per squad of Rubrics or Scarabocop. I don't really think this is an issue. I don't have any issues during my list building as a result of either of these two rules. I don't tend to want more than one Demon Prince. I often don't take any. And similarly with Zangors, I think we're getting such value now out of the Rubric Marines and the Terminators. You're either taking so many of them, it doesn't matter, and you could take as many Zangor blobs or Cultist blobs as you wanted, or Min squads for that matter, or you're just not using them at all. They're not seeing a huge amount of play at the moment because they're just not maybe quite as good as your other options. Alright then, so with that, those faction rules out of the way, let's move on to the Kabbalistic Rituals ability. And to be honest with you, that's the bit I'm most excited to talk about. It's the best part of the book as far as I'm concerned. So the Kabbalistic Rituals are your bonus of being 100% Thousand Suns army and not using any other factions in your army. Now I've heard people debate about whether or not they think they're worth giving up for sort of the soup options. But my opinion is that the rituals offer far more than they take away, and we'll come on to that just now. Before that, I just want to explain how the mechanic works. And how it works is by awarding you a number of Cabal points based on your army composition. If you played earlier editions, you might think of these as your warp charge dice, thinking back to 7th edition. Now it works that every psyker in your army contributes to the amount of Cabal points you're going to get. So a rubric aspiring sorcerer will only get you 1 point, although you could upgrade them to give you 2, whereas Magnus would give you 4 points. Typically Ahriman Exalted Sorcerers would be 3. What you do is you add up all of your points based on the number of units on the table at the start of your psychic phase, and this pool can be used to sort of supercharge your psychic phase, which is great. Importantly, you do get this pool every turn, but you cannot carry the points over into your next turn, so don't hold back, make sure you're using them. And as your psychers are killed, you actually reduce the amount of Cabal points available to you, so do try and keep them safe where you can. What makes the Cabal points and mechanics so good is you're generally using them after a psychic power has been manifested or attempt to be manifested. There are a number of uses and associated costs, and I won't go into all of them now, but I will cover off some of my favourites and how I like to use them. So a really simple one, 4 Cabal points after manifesting a Witchfire power. If you've inflicted some mortal wounds, you just do D3 more. Now this is incredible value for 4 points, and I generally use it every turn for some extra chip damage. If you were to able to combine this with a power that can target a character hidden in a squad or sort of behind a vehicle or something like that, you've actually got a really good psychic assassin. So something like Tzeentch's Firestorm, sort of, if you manage to fish for the mortals on 5 and then you chuck on D3 mortal wounds at the end, you've actually got a good chance of killing a character. The next one I want to talk about is the Pact from Beyond. So this is 7 Cabal points, but again incredibly strong, and just reduces a lot of the risk in the psychic phase. Essentially what it does is you spend your 7 Cabal points and you choose a psychic power, and it's counted as manifested at the lowest warp charge necessary. So I use this a lot, but for something like Twist of Fate to try and remove someone's invuln save, or Sorcerer's Facade or to teleport, that's a really, really powerful way of just making sure that you're not going to fluff the dice roll, because as we know in a dice game, these things can happen. And when there's points on the line there to maybe move something across onto an objective, or just to make sure that you're setting up yourself for a good turn later on, it's incredibly powerful. Now what's really interesting with this one, it also would let you cast a Super Smite if you've already attempted to cast Smite 5 times. Now this is really, really powerful because you can actually sort of give yourself firstly an automatic D6 mortal wounds, which is incredible, but it also does work, and it's been confirmed with the FAQ, that you can actually use this to bring back a Scarab Occult Terminator using the warp regeneration stratagem. So auto cast a power that requires more than a 9, so you wouldn't have to go the full 5 to do that. And then you can then just spend your 1 CP and bring back a Terminator. And I think that if you're playing Cult of Time, you'll potentially bring back 2 Terminators a turn. That's sort of 80 points. That's going to swing your game enormously. And the last one I want to talk about in detail is my favourite one actually. It's the Kabbalistic Focus. And this is, once a power is manifested, it cannot be denied by any means. And this one is just so huge because it makes the psychic phase so much more reliable and will absolutely swing a game. If you think about the ways that this can be used, it's if you've gotten off a really clutch power, you've gotten off a Death Hex, I can't remember what it's called already now. The new version of Death Hex, you get that off, can't be denied. You get off a Sorcerer's Facade, cannot be denied. And to be honest, the way that I normally use this actually is in conjunction with the Psychic Secondary. So if I'm trying to mutate some landscape, if I am trying to mentally interrogate or Psychic Ritual, just so your opponent can't turn this off, it's just guaranteeing you points. And I think to spend 8 Cabal points to essentially usually get a trade for 3 or so victory points it's unbelievable. Given that the army relies so much on its secondaries and doesn't have that many good options for it, really making sure you get some value out of those psychic secondaries is something I use probably, if the opponent has a deny and they're in range, I probably use it every single time. Alright, and so as I've said, those are some of my favourites. However, there are plenty of other great ones. Generally, they're allowing you to increase reliability, giving you a +1 or +2 to your cast a Witchfire for a second time with another Psyker. I love doing a double Doom Bolt, for instance. And the real beauty of them is that they generally happen after you attempt to manifest a power, which means you're just not overcommitting, you're not gambling on whether or not you're going to need it, so you don't ever feel like you need to waste points. There's also a really great one that allows you to perform a psychic action and gain a command point. And I again, if you've got sort of, I can't remember exactly 4 or 5 points left, I think it's 5, to be able to do that, it's just a great way of sort of topping up on your command points. Now keep in mind, a unit can generally only be selected for once per turn for a Kabbalistic ritual, and that's only with the exception of a warlord trait. So keep in mind that you can't chain these effects together. However, you'll typically have enough psychers in the right positions to be able to use them, hopefully, to gain good advantage. Which actually leads us really nicely into army composition, and today I'm not going to go deeply into warlord traits, relics, data sheets, or even cults, but here I'm just going to give you sort of my guiding principles. Now, the way that I play them and the way that I see them is that the Thousand Suns are a durable, mid-range specialist who have a tremendous amount of psychic output. Therefore, no one will be surprised when I tell you that the way to build and play Thousand Suns will rely on keeping your psychers safe. You want to be able to keep your opponent's list at arm's length and unleash that devastating firepower of both mortal wounds, and to be honest with you, the AP2 shooting from the Terminators and the Rubrics is equally as powerful as those mortal wounds, just through sheer weight of fire, but they're all at 24 inches or so. As a consequence, obviously, you're going to need psychers. In my tournament builds, I'm typically running 3 HQs, and I'm typically always taking Araman. I think the reroll cast is just too powerful. Casting 29 is insane. And a number of 5-man Rubik squads, just for generating Kabal points and holding the board. At the moment, I believe that your best bet is your minimum squad of Rubiks rather than big expensive squads, because despite their +1 saving against damage 1 referee and despite their 5 Binvon, they do still die quite easily, especially if your opponent can throw their own mortal wounds at them. In addition, they can't really fight in close combat, so you don't want them to get tagged and lose an expensive block models for an entire turn or more. That said, I think there is place made for one big unit just to sort of work as a pseudo backup Terminator blob, and that's something I'm going to sort of talk about a lot, which is the Terminators. So I'm a huge fan of what they can do in terms of their ranged output, their ability to be buffed, and their durability is better because they've always got a 2-up save to start with, and obviously bringing models back can actually make it so that they are quite sticky in the game. And like I said, having objectives secured means you can kind of plop them ideally sort of 23 inches away from your opponent and just sort of rain fire on them for the entire game on an objective. And to be honest, if you can get sort of 4 or 5 turns of them doing that in a game, you're in a really good place. In terms of playstyle, I tend to play my Thousand Suns relatively cagey, particularly turn 1 and turn 2, and try and invite my opponent into stepping into my range, which is typically 24 inches, and that just allow me to counter punch with everything I have. Thousand Suns don't really have enough units to be able to trade or overextend like some armies do, maybe Drakari, Sisters, Jinsid Cult. So if you have the option to sort of grind into the late game, I think the army actually comes to life sort of turn 3 onwards, which is how I try and play it. And a lot of our secondary objectives do allow us to do that. As a result, I typically try and build in as much mobility as possible. So discs, powers that let you, psychic powers that let you move again, such as Warp Time, Unprolific Crystal, Duplicity. All of these things allow you to just gain an advantage in the late game once you've had to thin out some things. So relics like the Unprolific Crystal are actually incredible utility, especially late game where you can actually score big points as well. Just using the crystal, you can get a huge point swing. So here's my top tip for you. Note that you can use the Unprolific Crystal in your command phase. And because you score primary points at the end of your command phase, you can actually use it to swing the primary for a turn. So if you see that there's an objective with nobody on it within 9 inches, you can actually just use your crystal and just hop onto it. That means that you'll get potentially 5 more points and maybe get you a full 10 more points if you then control more as well. This can also be combined, so you can pop your crystal, hop into an objective, and then you could also do something like retrieve victorious data onto that as well, because that also happens in the movement phase. So I see some people try and do this with the Cult of Duplicity, Sorcerous Facade, but that happens in the psychic phase. But this does give you a way to sort of get into the corners for the sake of retrieve victorious data, if that's the section that you'd like to choose. Personally, I try not to choose it because I don't want to overextend, like I've mentioned. But it is an option. So the other way that I see players build their armies is a threat overload method, and I have seen this work well too. Lists will typically include things fast moving and hard hitting, maybe Magnus, Helldrakes, just anything where you can frighten your opponent and overwhelm them. Whilst I think that can work, I also feel like this style just isn't for me based on the way that I like to play. As I've mentioned, I'm more cagey. I think that I like my opponents to come to me. So that is it for today's Faction 101 video. I hope that you've been able to learn something. I hope that I've been able to sort of articulate what I've been trying to get across, which is the army has a lot of options. The army-wide faction rules are really good. The Kabal point system, again, I think that just being able to sort of guarantee yourself getting points or getting buffs when you need them is absolutely worth keeping the army sort of mono faction, and I hope that you can use this information to go forward and crush your enemies. So until next time, I'll see you on the next Faction 101.